Well, good morning and welcome to Mirador at the end of a very frustrating week, technically, but one way or another, we've managed to get through it. And here we are with Philip Meredith and myself. And really, this is Phil's hour, as it were. So I shall say as little as possible, and he will wax lyrical. Good morning, Philip.
Yes, good morning, Keith. Good morning, everybody who's good enough to watch us. Whether I can fill a full hour is questionable, so Mr. Keith will have to say something to help me. On Monday this week, I did a podcast about the poetry written by soldiers and civilians during World War One. As a postscript to that, there wasn't just verse written, there were trench songs devised and sung by the troops, and there were also songs sung in the music hall. The First World War was a strange one in the sense that what we would call the home front, which came into its own in the Second World War, didn't really exist in the First World War because the British Isles were hardly touched by the war apart from the wounded or sadly dead soldiers coming home. There was no bombing to speak of. The Germans did send Zeppelins over later in the war to drop a few bombs on London, but nothing like what London has suffered in the Blitz. There were shellings from German cruisers in the North Sea, so places like Skegness and all those towns up that northeast Yorkshire and into sort of Geordieland coast were shelled from the sea. Damage was done, but that was about it in terms of the home front. So really, not only were the poets, as we discovered on Monday, telling the public what it was really like over there in Flanders and France, the soldiers' songs, many of which went into the music halls, which was the big way of entertainment in those days, sprang up. And in 1917, an editor called Nettlingham published a book called Tommy's Tunes. Well, that speaks for itself. Tommy was the nickname for the average British infantryman. Even the Germans called them Tommies. And in this book or pamphlet, he reassured his readership in this way. He says, "It is a peculiarity of British humour to be derogatory to its own dignity, to wipe itself in the mud, to affect self-satire to an alarming extent." But he also pointed out that any foreigner who took the British soldier to be lacking in discipline or esprit de corps, hearing such cynicism and self-satire, would be dangerously mistaken. The slippage between song and deed was also noted by one of the poets, Ivor Gurney, whose regiment sang "I Want to Go Home" in the middle of a heavy bombardment. And he commented, "It's not a brave song, but brave men sang it." So a few examples. Never mind. I mean, I'm not going to sing. Don't worry. I'll just have to read it out. But never mind. If the sergeant drinks your rum, never mind. And your face may lose its smile, never mind. He's entitled to a tot, but not the bleeding lot. But if your sergeant drinks your rum, never mind. When old Jerry shells the trench, never mind. When old Jerry shells the trench, never mind. Though the sandbags bust and fly, you have only once to die. So if old Jerry shells the trench, never mind. If you get stuck on the wire, never mind. If you get stuck on the wire, never mind. Though you're stuck there all the day, they count you dead and stop your pay. But if you get stuck on the wire, never mind. If the sergeant says you're mad, never mind. Perhaps you are a little bit, never mind. Just be calm, don't answer back, because the sergeant stands no slack. So if he says you're mad, well, you are. So that's never mind. To the tune of an old rugby song, which you, Keith, will remember, Inky Pinky Parlez-Vous. The song is actually Mademoiselle from Armentières. And the first verse is Mademoiselle from Armentières, parlez-vous. Mademoiselle from Armentières, parlez-vous. Mademoiselle from Armentières, she hasn't been kissed for 40 years. Hinky Pinky parlez-vous. And the final line is, you might forget the gas and shell, parlez-vous. You might forget the gas and shell, parlez-vous. You might forget the gas and shell, but you'll never forget the mademoiselle, hinky pinky parlez-vous. One that everybody knows about is pack up your troubles in your old kit bag. Private Perks is a funny little codger with a smile, a funny smile, 5 feet none. He's an artful little dodger with a smile, a sunny smile. Flesh all broke, he'll have his little joke. He can't be suppressed. All the others have to grin when he gets this off his chest. And then the chorus is, pack up your troubles in your old kit bag and smile, smile, smile. While you've got a Lucifer to light your fag. Smile, boys, that's the style. What's the use of worrying? It never was worthwhile. So pack up your troubles in your old kit bag and smile, smile, smile. Private Perks, he came back from the Bosch shooting with his smile, his funny smile. Round his home he sent it about recruiting with his smile, his sunny smile. He told all his pals, the short, the tall, what a time he'd had. And as each enlisted like a man, Private Perks said, now, my lad, then pack up your troubles in your bit bags and carry on. Now, mentioning pals, one of the really sad features of World War I was that whole villages and towns were recruited en masse by what were called pals regiments. So basically, all your mates, like in that song there, all your mates would enlist at the same time. And of course, if you get disasters like the Somme, and there's a book I've got called The Pals on the Somme, and it makes somber reading, no pun intended. They were just wiped out. So whole groups of friends. There are photographs in the book of pre-war, all friends, footballers, you name it. And they point out who's left after the armistice. And the answer is not many. So that was it's easy in hindsight, but that way of recruiting contributed to whole communities being bereaved and grieving. This is called Fred Carnot's Army. Now, Keith, do you know the hymn, The Church is One Foundation?
Yes.
Do you know the tune to that?
The church is one foundation.
Right, well, this is Fred Carnot's Army, and the troops used to sing it to the tune of that hymn. Now, I can't do that because I don't know the tune, but you'll recognise this. But anyway, we are Fred Carnot's army. What bloody use are we? We cannot fight, we cannot shoot, so we join the infantry. But when we get to Berlin, the Kaiser, he will say, Hoch, hoch, mein Gott, what a jolly fine lot are the ragtime infantry. We are Fred Carno's army, a jolly lot are we. Fred Carno is our captain. Charlie Chaplin is our OC. But when we get to Berlin, the Kaiser, he will say, what a jolly fine lot are the ragtime infantry.
Yes, I can recognize that being set to that tune.
Well, I'm envious if you can apply those lyrics to the tune in your head. You've got the song. If it's a German, guns up. If it's a German with hands up, don't start taking prisoners now. Give him in the neck and say bow wow. If it's a German, guns up. Stick him in the leg. It is sublime. If he whispers in your ear, camarade, camarade, guns up every time. So that's quite a cynical one, showing the hatred by that time between the soldiers, and there were sadly incidents of prisoners being shot or bayoneted, having surrendered. Then there's one in Pidgin French, basically after the war is over. Après la guerre finie, soldats anglais partis. Mademoiselle Franzet beaucoup pleurait après la guerre finie. Après la guerre finie, soldats anglais partis. Mademoiselle is in the family way. Après la guerre finie. Après la guerre finie, soldats anglais partis. Mademoiselle can go to hell. Après la guerre finie. Here comes a whiz-bang. The whiz-bang was a particular kind of shell used by the Germans, and it made the noise whiz through the air, and then it exploded. So, hush, here comes a whiz-bang. Hush, here comes a whiz-bang. Now then, soldier, get down them stairs, into your dugout and say your prayers. Hush, here comes a whiz-bang, and it's making straight for you. And you'll see all the wonders of no man's land if a whiz-bang, bang, gets you. There's a very, very rude one here, which I'm not going to read out, about the general inspecting the trenches. But let me just put it this way. One of the lines is him saying, I refuse to command a division which leaves its excreta about. And then it gets ruder and ruder, so I'll leave that one. Now, bombed last night and bombed the night before. Going to get bombed tonight if we never get bombed anymore. When we're bombed, we are scared as we can be. Can't stop the bombing from old higher Germany. Chorus, they're warning us, one shell hole for the four of us. Thank your lucky stars, there's no more of us, 'cause one of us can fill it all alone. Gassed last night and gassed the night before. Going to get gassed tonight if we never get gassed anymore. When we're gassed, we're sick as we can be. For phosgene and mustard gas is much too much for me. They're killing us, they're killing us. One respirator for the four of us. Thank your lucky stars, there's no more of us, so one of us can take it all alone. I wore a tunic, a dirty khaki tunic, and you wore civilian clothes. We fought and bled at loose, while you were on the booze that no one here knows. Oh, you were with the trenches, you were with the wenches, while we were in the trenches, facing the German foe. Oh, you were a-slacking while we were attacking down the Menin Road. Then, of course, there's the classics like Goodbye, 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 wipe the tear, baby D, from your eye. Though it's hard to part, I know, I'll be tickled to death to go. Don't cry, don't sigh, there's a silver lining in the sky. Bonsoir, old thing, cheerio, chin chin, napoo, toodaloo, goodbye. You know that one, Keith.
Very evocative, these
Yeah, they're extraordinary. They're almost better than the
Absolutely.
poetry.
I mean, they paint the picture, don't they?
Absolutely. So, goodbye. One of the verses is, Little Private Patrick Shaw, he was a prisoner of war, till a Hun with a gun called him pig dog for fun. Then Paddy punched him in the jaw, right across the barbed wire fence. The German dropped then, dear, oh dear, all the wire gave way, and Paddy yelled hooray as he ran for the Dutch frontier. And then a trench song on which they based the film that you will remember, Oh, What a Lovely War. Do you remember Oh, What a Lovely War?
Yes, indeed. I actually I served a fellowship in the professional theatre, and that was one of the productions that year. So I actually saw it live on stage.
Well, up to your waist in water, up to your eyes in slush, using the kind of language that makes the sergeant blush. Who wouldn't join the army? That's what we all inquire. Don't we pity the poor civilians sitting beside the fire? Now, there you have a classic example of the sarcasm, the irony. You know, they'd love to be back home by the fire, but they're making out that they're the ones in the nice place, and that they're pitying the poor civilians. So then you get the chorus. Oh, 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 it's a lovely war. Who wouldn't be a soldier, eh? Oh, it's a shame to take the pay. As soon as Reveille has gone, we feel just as heavy as lead, but we never get up till the sergeant brings our breakfast up to bed. Again, just a joke. Oh, 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 it's a lovely war. What do we want with eggs and ham when we've got plum and apple jam? Form fills, right turn. How shall we spend the money we earn? Oh, 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 it's a lovely war. When does a soldier grumble? When does he make a fuss? No one is more contented in all the world than us. Oh, it's a cushy life, boys. We really love it so. Once a fellow was sent on leave and simply refused to go. Come to the cookhouse door, boys. Sniff at the lovely stew. Who is it, says the colonel, gets better grub than you? Any complaints this morning? Do we complain? Not we. What's the matter with lumps of onion floating around in our tea? So that's most of what that book has for music hall and trench songs. And I agree with you, they are very evocative and they are from the troops. They're not poets. They're just your regular Tommy infantryman. Now, the other link from Monday is you asked the very interesting question of me, which I didn't know the answer to. Was there as much poetry written in the Second World War as the First? Well, I researched that online, and the answer is there was World War II poetry written by many, many people, male and female, but there was nothing like as much written as we found with the war poets in just the British Army. And we have to remember, of course, the massive differences between the two wars in terms of what we today would call technology. Because in the Second World War, as I've hinted at, there really was a home front because the Germans bombed the crap out of Britain. It wasn't just London, the Midlands. I mean, Coventry, we all know about, literally razed to the ground. The ports, Southampton, Portsmouth, Newcastle, Liverpool, Manchester, were all hit. So there was a real home front, and so the civilians were getting a really bad taste of what the Tommies had suffered in the First World War. Their homes were destroyed. We all know how awful the Blitz was. and how long it went on for, and how many people were killed. The poetry I found from the Second World War is slightly different from the first. Some of it is quite graphic, but a lot of it is quite sort of, I don't know what the word is really, perhaps esoteric, if you get me. It's slightly light-hearted, slightly tangential. They try to avoid the visceral stuff. So I've got a bit of a selection here. And this is what I mean. I'm reading some excerpts from a poem written by a man in London called Timothy Corsellis. And his poem is entitled The Morning After the Raid. Now, you'd never get that in World War One. You know, you won't find a poem, the day after the Zeppelin came over. There wasn't such a thing. But in World War Two, the blue overalls and metal helmets, the lorries one time used for coal, the worried warden and the rescue worker hovered and hurried among the ruins. Under this pile of falling masonry, under those spillikins of beams, where number 32 lies shattered, there may be a body. Dig, for there may be a body. Sweat fell. We were not the strong and young. They were out training, preparing. We are the best of those remaining. We are the mellow and the hardened. And though our backs are hard of bending, under aloofness our souls bend rending. The sorrow out of the bereaved father's breast, tearing it out and holding it in our own hands, adopting it to our own bodies, caring for the children we had never seen. Sometimes we pray to be hardened and callous, but God turns a deaf ear, and we know hate and sorrow intimately, and we do not mind dying tomorrow. So that's from a civilian who would have volunteered and worked on clearing the bomb debris, looking for bodies, survivors, but usually sadly dead, men, women, and children. A World War II poet who was killed in action was a chap called Alan Lewis. And this is written by his longtime girlfriend. She was called Brenda Chamberlain. Because when he went to war, he said to her, I'll come walking the hills with you in flesh or ghost. Surely I will. And he wrote that in his last letter to her. So she writes this. Now his sweet singing spirits leave the orange grove. The blood hibiscus and dust-wheeling suns burn through trance leaves above each earth-resting body of Alan, son of the grey valleys, by whose heart's ash we weep him in his own land. Slowly returning on salt tidal tears, the homing spirit smiles through springtime shower, throws war's dirt from him in the barren lake, becomes complete. The dreaming poet, lover and soldier, on rock begins promised pilgrimage, for he said, surely he would come again, in flesh or ghost, beside me on the hill. It's quite wistful, isn't it? And full of grief.
Two or three things have created questions in my mind, Philip. First of all, I was surprised when you were talking about the messages sent in song. You didn't mention the song that quite often went with "Pack Up Your Troubles," and that is "It's a Long Way to Tipperary."
Yeah, well, I mentioned that on Monday. That was part of a poem. If I can find it, that was part of a poem, actually. and I mentioned that on Monday. I can't remember. Yeah, there we are. The soldier and poet Robert Service, who lost his brother Albert in August 16, wrote the poem Tipperary Days. And therefore it included, it's a long way to Tipperary, it's a long way to go, it's a long way to Tipperary, and the sweetest girl I know. Goodbye to Piccadilly, farewell Leicester Square. It's a long, long way to Tipperary, but my heart's right there. And as I mentioned on Monday, there's a French equivalent that he writes as well. C'est un chemin long to Tipperary, c'est un chemin long, c'est vrai. C'est un chemin long de Tipperary et la belle fille que je connais. Bonjour Piccadilly, au revoir Leicester Square. C'est un chemin long to Tipperary, mais mon cœur is there. So that's Robert Service.
Now, secondly, you said that the nature of the Second World War was very different to that of the First. But was there the agony of trench warfare in the Second World War as there was in the First?
Not to that extent, there wasn't. Obviously, there were times. The irony is, it was the Germans who had to dig in to a certain extent after the invasion, because they were then defending what they call Fortress Europe. But there was no line of trenches as there was in the First World War, because as we discussed on Monday, they ran from the Belgian coast right to the Swiss border. It was one continuous line of trenches, the Western Front. Nothing like that in the Second World War that I'm aware of. There might have been similar. No, I'm sorry, I'm getting myself mixed up now, because there were trenches on the Eastern Front as well with the Russians and the Austro-Hungarians. But no, to my knowledge, in the Second World War, it wasn't commonplace at all.
Now, the verse that you read from the Second World War, it was much more poetic, I thought, than the verse that, or the writing, let's say, which is fairly straightforward and, as we use the word, evocative. The Second World War verse was that verse. Was it mostly written by poets?
Yes. I mean, the last one I read, I think, what you've done there typically of you is you've actually put into proper words what I was trying to get across. I was using the word esoteric, but yeah, you've got it. They're more poetic. And that last one I read for Alan Lewis is poetic. So my opinion would be, because when I researched this, what I found was there's an online site called The Editors, and they have their choices, their selections of various types and times of poetry. And it was through that I discovered about the World War II poets and their selection. So yes, I think whether they were fighting men or not, yeah, they were deemed poets. Alan Lewis certainly was. Now, the other massive difference, well, no, that's wrong, it wasn't massive. The Germans did use U-boats in the First World War, but nothing like to the extent they used them in the Second World War. The Second World War, they hunted in packs. They were known as the wolf packs. And until the Enigma code was broken by Alan Turing at Bletchley Park, nobody knew where these submarines were. There was no sonar, there was no radar in the early days of the war. And they were immensely destructive. And the amount of the tonnage of ships, both military and civilian convoys, that were sunk by the German wolf packs was simply horrendous. And without doubt, Britain was literally on her knees because she was starving to death. The rationing was severe because none of the supplies were getting through. So it was pretty desperate stuff until, as I say, the Enigma code was broken. And with a captured Enigma machine from an imprisoned submarine, they managed to begin to find out where these subs were. Now, in the film, The Imitation Game, which is all about Turing and Enigma, when the eureka moment comes and he finally works out with his machine the code breakage, he gets a message that tells them exactly where the next convoy and which convoy it will be attacked. And one of his helpers, a younger lad, started going, please tell them this. My brother's on that convoy. And Turing said, we can't tell them about this because they'll realize we've cracked their code.
Yeah.
And of course, the young lad went absolutely mental. And then the next thing you see in the film is this really realistic shot of this convoy that's just blasted to pieces. So pretty powerful stuff.
Yes.
The reason I mentioned the U-boats is I found a poem.
Bletchley Park which showed just how conscienceless a war was. Because here this man invents the machine which saves the country, can identify where the wolf packs are, and so on and so forth, and they bang him up for being a homosexual.
Yeah, they did. I mean, because it was taking him so long to crack the code, there were people and other soldiers at Bletchley Park who got so cheesed off with him that they wanted to try and destroy the machine. And in the end, he actually wrote to Winston Churchill directly and said, Prime Minister, I have enemies here. I'm doing my best and I will give you the goods, but please protect me. And Churchill did, much to the chagrin of the military and some of Turing's colleagues, because he said to Turing and the commanding officer, Turing is the boss when it comes to this machine. And as far as I'm concerned, the Prime Minister, he can hire and fire whoever he wants. And the thing that did it, and again, it's true, it's in the film, but it's true, the words he was missing on every German message overheard were Heil Hitler. And one of the listeners in the bar at Bletchley, and Turing just happened to overhear this, and he said, what? So at the end of every message, the German says, Heil Hitler. Yes, she said. So he rushes off with the female scientist, played by Keira Knightley, and that was it. So he types it all into his machine, and you've got this really suspense moment where the machine's whirring round, and then bit by bit, each spool stops. So the code, bit by bit, is being broken. It's a hell of a film. Anyway,
Yes.
This poem is called Death of a U-Boat. The hunter ship, relentless, ploughs a broad white furrow on the sea, and in the closing waters sows unerring, quick, explosive seeds. The blossom is the deathly flower, war's ancient wound that twines and clasps, dead victim with the victor's hour of crushed cold limbs and bubbling oil. In victor and in vanquished dies the blaze of savage energy. Now pity collects her emblems in the gaze of silent eyes that have no smile. So what he's doing there, this is a poet called John Soames. The analogy is what you will have realised is of a farmer sowing seeds. So the destroyer, the British Navy destroyer, is ploughing the furrow through the sea like a ploughman would, and the unerring, quick, explosive seeds are the depth charges. And if a depth charge worked and blew the submarine up, you would get a bubbling, a frothing, like a blossom on the surface of the sea. And you would get infrastructure, oil and bodies coming up to the surface. Hence, crushed cold limbs and bubbling oil. Now, if you just got oil coming up, that was a submarine playing a trick on you. Because if you just got oil, it was released by the submarine to make the Navy think they'd scored a hit. So if that happened, they'd just chuck more depth charges down. Now pity collects her emblems in the gaze of silent eyes that have no smile. In other words, the dead. Another poem is The Field Hospital. Here words are out of bounds, the pulse of silence throbs, reason licking wounds makes language out of sobs. Evocative as song, the literate groans explain that terror's clumsy hand pokes at the source of pain. Words are flecked with foam, they spread a stain of sound, that thought is haunted home by voices underground. So that's quite a dark portrait, but poetic, you may agree, but there are other dark portraits of how primitive and savage, frankly, the field hospitals could be. And then we have another mournful one for someone lost in 1943. His initials were RAS, and the poem is entitled For RAS. He left the country that he loved so well, Shorebridge, Piedmont, and the Tremlett runs, and climbed in the centre of war by his own trail, barred from the easy virtue of enlistment. He fought a private battle for his chance to share the world's crisis. On his way to the scenes of death, he met death. Death reached out with an eagerness that matched his own. Death, violent, Atlantic, submarine, the challenge so absolute was met absolutely. It was as though there was special need to attend to this boy's daring, as though if his will survived. So that's the other side of it. That's from a sailor or maybe a merchantman being killed, being sunk and killed by a submarine. Then another one I found, military camp. Learning the parts of a rifle, the smell of oil, learning to march, to wheel in the rub of khaki, learning to hate, to be resourceful and kill. They grope like wind through the night or rain in a hill. Definite weapons, slicker than wounds, surround them. They camouflage, they bristle with arms to the teeth. They implement with knives their patient wonder and wander like children the iron techniques of death. The military camp, the rows of huts, the tanks and guns, here and there grow strange with the new thought that scraps old discipline, germ of a people's army trained to change. Who whisper freedom soon must learn to shout, brighter than bayonets or first conquest come rolled back by seas to play a finer part. The greatest victory is the one at home. Now, I believe that was written before D-Day. That's my guess. I couldn't find a date on that, but it sounds very much like, because, I mean, the British Isles, as you probably know, was just a fortress. It was just one huge military camp. You know, British and American soldiers all getting ready for D-Day. Now, what's this one? Yeah, now that the war is here. This was written when the war really began, because 1939, there was what they would call the phony war. Nothing happened. We declared war on Germany. Nothing happened to Britain. We sent very little over there. And Hitler just carried on invading. So there was the phony war. Anyway, it finally arrives, of course, mainly with the bombings. So now that the war is here, thank God, the merciful close perspective blocking out facades of peace, which otherwise would dwarf these stunted sandbag virtues by which we live. For men must live by virtues, even when bombing the helpless innocents, even hearts pruned to the stump, sprout virtues or else die. In this diminished world, we must acquire, although our small hearts ache, thin sinews crack, unplumbable courage, numb endurance, blind sacrifice, high skill in homicide. God help us, peering close in Lilliput, as giants of 7 inches still to see, only their pygmy splendour, their mouse magnificence. Again, particularly that second verse, you know, analogizing with Gulliver's Tales and Lilliput. The smallness of man, I suppose, in the face of all this armament and destruction. Now, I found a poem by a lady called Josephine Jackson, and I like this one because it just showed the link. It showed the link between the two wars. I found this quite interesting, actually, and it's just headed for Wilfred Owen. Now, let's remind ourselves, Wilfred Owen was arguably the greatest of the World War I poets, and he was killed only weeks before the armistice by a sniper. And I told everybody on Monday that his poor mother was given the telegram, the black ridged telegram, announcing her son's death, her only child's death, on the day that the bells were ringing out in the churches because of Armistice Day. And I just asked everybody on Monday to imagine how heartrending that must have been. Just awful. Anyway, Josephine Jackson writes, "This day, this night should be familiar to you. These sounds, these faces, this red mud and glare, again is served upon the board that knew you, the ugly feast at which you took your share. The skeletons at ease beneath the crosses are unconcerned with diving Messerschmitts, impervious to estimated losses, and unambitious of direct hits. You, safe as they are, ignore delirium. This time your lips escape the bitter ration, and the 6 stumbling men whose lips are dumb go scatheless from your terrible compassion." So she's comparing that now Wilfred, bless him, is under a military cross in a cemetery somewhere. He doesn't have to bother anymore. He isn't listening to the Messerschmitts, the ME-109s, the main fighter the Germans used. He's unconcerned with them now. He doesn't bother about estimated losses in battle and direct hits, but she acknowledges that he still will possess his. See, That's an oxymoron, isn't it, Keith? Terrible compassion. That's a cracking oxymoron.
Yeah.
Because he always had the compassion for men in this situation. A slightly light-hearted one here. Ditty for departing troops. Keep your eye fixed normally on woe. War solves problems. Ends with armistice. When honour is at stake, we gladly go. The victor's rose will flower on our grave. For justice under her bloody blindfold is wide awake, we know. Now, you might think that's a World War I poem, but it's not. That was written in 1944. For DL killed in the last war again. So this is not the female poet, the poetess. I couldn't find out the source of this one. But for DL killed in the last war, we must fight now, not with any desire for tearing glory from the jackets of the men we kill, and not in anger, but in sorrow that men again must kill and be killed before the world you hope for, too, can be called something more than a dream of men who are weary, something more than a respite of men from danger. We must fight now. We must fight now, not for more red miles on the schoolroom map, no more than you, but while the men were cheering and the women had ended fearing how their sons were faring, someone stole your dreams and sold them for money. They found your plans for a new world, tore them up, and those who had made them had died, and they were not many, and we must fight now. We must fight now, and must keep our plans when the war is over, and we must keep our hopes, and we must make a world where this man and that can be clearly heard, where every man can hope and think and speak freely, where no man's faith is barred, for this, that each man may be free forever. We must fight now. I think that's a brilliant poem.
Yes, yes. Is if I may, I am recalling various things that, if I had been older, that I may have turned into verse. One abiding memory that I have of the Second World War is we had relatives in Lichfield, which is a Midland city.
Yeah.
And we visited these relatives, and they had a cottage on one of the main streets. And suddenly a convoy appeared, and it just went on and on and on and on.
Yeah.
And I assume now, because of course nobody ever revealed secrets, that it was taking men to D-Day.
Yes, I'm sure you're right. I mean, how old would you have been in June 1944?
I would have been about 4, I guess, 4 or 5.
Yeah.
That same convoy, I saw my first black soldier.
Well, he would have been an American.
All black. It was obviously a platoon or a regiment or whatever the structure in the army is that was assigned to making sure that those men and goods were transported. And also, it was the first time that I heard a 4-letter word.
You've got a very good memory, Keith.
The trucks were so close that if one stopped just for a second, the next one would ram into him, and you could hear it going down the convoy. Bing, 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 bing. And I mean, they were just evocative sounds and words, and also today we would be appalled. But I had an aunt who played the piano, and she had a piece of music, sheet music, which the title was "Chocolate Soldier from the USA."
Yes.
And can you imagine how that would go down now?
Well, I can imagine. But of course, the Americans, black or white, caused a great deal of envy amongst the British soldiers because the English civilians, particularly the women, they flocked to these Yanks who came over with chocolate, with nylon stockings, and my understanding is that the black guys, the black Americans, were very popular with the English women.
Yes,
The
they
black
were.
GIs.
Yes.
But
I can remember my cousins, because I was the youngest and the smallest, putting me up to saying to American soldiers who were in camps nearby, "Got any gum, chum?" And then one cousin said, "Ah, that's an officer. Go for him. He'll have chocolate."
well, you were pretty canny, weren't you, as youngsters? Nothing's changed there. Nothing's changed there.
Yeah.
2 more to go. Going to the war. Tell me not, Evelyn, I failed your soft and shadowed
It is
soul.
amazing how I've forgotten a lot until I have a conversation such as I'm having with you, and then it all comes back. But my trying to explain to people what it was like in those days is, of course, most families were Edwardian. I had dozens and dozens of great aunts and cousins and so on, whereas I have absolutely none now. But I was walking along with, I distinctly remember walking along with my Aunt Lillian, and a plane went overhead, and I said, "Aunt Lillian, is that one of theirs or ours?" "Oh, that's one of ours, dear," she said. And my next question was, "Why did God make Germans?" To which her response was, "Hush, child, hush."
So you were asking astute questions even then.
Indeed.
Quite frankly, it's a question I would ask today. Why did God create Germans? He could at least have created them with a sense of humour.
Well, you managed the full hour, bar 4 minutes, Philip, and I found that the earthiness, if you like, in your exploration of both First and Second World War poetry and verse, reflecting what happened and what conditions were like, is really not only interesting, but also brings back memories to me that have long been concealed, and I wouldn't think about unless I was having this sort of conversation. So I'm grateful to you.
Well, you're welcome. I want to read one final poem, which is by an American poet, wartime poet called Randall Jarrell, who is in the US Air Force. And it's called, rather sadly, "The Death of the Ball Turret Gunner." Now, on the American bombers, the tail bubble was the gunner, and he would be cramped into this incredibly exposed bubble of glass at the very back of the bomber and be expected to fire off his machine gun at oncoming fighters. And invariably, it was, well, we could call it the graveyard slot. The death rate was enormous. And this is the death of the ball turret gunner. "From my mother's sleep, I fell into the state, and I hunched in its belly till my wet fur froze. 6 miles from earth, loosed from its dream of life, I woke to black flak and the nightmare fighters. When I died, they washed me out of the turret with a hose. Isn't that sad?
Yeah, yeah.
The flak was the ground guns. They called it flak because the shells would be fired airborne and then explode, or were meant to explode, next to the aircraft. Anyway, Keith, that's me done.
Well, thank you, Philip, and a fascinating hour. And you actually are going to have your own program on Monday, along with you've actually kidnapped Susie from me, and you're going to be rivals to I've forgotten Holly and whatever his name was.
Oh, Philip Schofield.
Yes.
Oh, please don't compare me with him.
Well, you've got the name.
Yeah, but he spelt his Philip differently. Mine is one L.
One L.
His is two.
Right. And the difference will not only be in the spelling of the name.
Right. Well, what you must do is send me Susie's email address.
Yes, I'm going to. The moment we're off the air, I shall I'll get onto the email and send it to you.
But you say it's my show. I mean, are you not going to link us? Or
well, I will be lurking in the background, as you suggested I should. I will be the new scheme of things. It will not be too different, but I shall do break an egg for the first half hour until 8:30, and then you and Susie will take over. But I shall lurk in the background so that if you need me or want me or whatever, I shall be there. But basically, I think it'll be your program. Your remit is to invite anybody from either those people that we would say are staff on, or to invite external guests. It'll be up to you and in consultation with Susie as to what the content will be. So I'll grin in the background until such time as you may want to ask me a sense.
I lost you there.
There we go. It's back again. We've been very lucky, really, because we've got an hour when the internet has not played up. For some reason, the internet in the Black Horse this morning was very difficult, but it stayed with us for an hour, and that's the only interruption we've had. So I'm grateful for that. But anyway, we'll see you on Monday morning, and we'll look forward to it.
I just want you to clarify. You will be sending us the links, won't you?
Well, we'll discuss that over the weekend. I think it might be a good idea that if we take a slight break at 8:30 to separate me from you, as it were, and then you've now got the link. It might be a good idea to try and use it, and if it doesn't work, we can revert.
No, I'll do that.
Okie doke.
All right. Well, let's speak. Send me the email address and let's speak over the weekend.
Right. Okay.
And I've sent you a text. Can you please make a note? I cannot be with you on Friday, the 22nd of March.
All right.
So make a note of that, then you know.
Yes.
Because I have to take a friend to Southampton Airport.
Well, okay. Take your laptop with you and report from Southampton Airport.
No. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Lewis in the Black Horse Pub.